I think it's time we talk chaos. If you're new to Warhammer, you've most likely heard it mentioned loads, but you're probably not entirely sure what it is. And believe me, I get it. Chaos in Warhammer, it's a wild ride. And if you're new to this grimdark universe, it can feel kind of like trying to drink from a fire hose. Chaos, it's not just one thing. It's kind of like, it's like a big chaotic family reunion, and not on a Kardashian scale. It's much less creepy, but it does have all sorts of like crazy elements. I mean, think cults, demons, dark gods. It can take a bit of time to untangle how all these pieces fit together to create this glorious, terrifying mess that every 40k fan knows and loves. But don't worry, here's a quick and hopefully easy breakdown of what you really need to know about chaos. In simple terms, it sort of represents complete chaos and disorder. It is what it says on the tin, and that's a perfect way to describe this dark and mysterious realm of chaos. It's filled with powerful and malevolent beings that sort of thrive on raw and psychic energy. When someone is exposed to chaos, it can have this corrupting influence even on the most skilled psychers. They risk suffering from strange mutations, or in worst cases, losing their soul to a tempting demon from this chaotic realm. It's a dangerous place, and not everyone who encounters it will come out the same. All this crazy chaotic energy, it's mostly kept locked away in a different dimension called the immaterium. Thank goodness for that, right? But there's some pretty big rifts that break through into our reality, like the infamous Eye of Terror. Now, if you're new, the Eye of Terror, it's huge. It's like this swirling rift in space. Think of it like a giant hole that leads to the chaotic realm of chaos, where all the really dark and creepy stuff starts to happen. It's like a hotspot for all sorts of nasty things like demons and chaos followers. They're basically worshippers of their chaotic gods. It's a really dangerous area because the influence of chaos, it can corrupt nearby planets and even people. The Eye of Terror, it's super important though, particularly in lore, because it's linked to a major event called the Horus Heresy, which is basically where a bunch of traitor forces turned against the Emperor. That's a whole other story. We'll get there one day. But because of this chaos, it's always a battleground where the forces of chaos and the Imperium, which are the good guys, they're constantly fighting. So yeah, the Eye of Terror, it's basically a big chaotic mess that represents the ongoing struggle between order and chaos within the Warhammer universe. But let's be real, if you manage to go through life within Warhammer without running into chaos at some point, whether you're in the safer parts of the Imperium or not, then you're pretty lucky. Its gross influence, it's everywhere, and many people, they actually worship it. Countless wars and conflicts have been sparked because of it, and it's just a part of life. Stepping into the immaterium, it's basically the next chapter for most people within the 40k universe once they leave the mortal world. But their souls, they get all mixed up and gobbled up by these creepy, chittering monsters that they just lurk within this wild place. The immaterium, or the warp as we like to call it, it's this swirling storm of crazy energy packed with these nightmarish beings, all have one thing on their minds: souls to munch on. It's like a dimension where the usual rules of physics, time and reality, they just go completely out the window. If you ever think about wandering in there, for whatever reason, just make sure you're prepared. Without some solid protection gear like Geller fields. Now, Geller fields, they're like energy shields that protect spaceships when they travel through the warp. So when a ship enters the warp, all kinds of these creepy monsters and demons are just waiting to attack. Now, if you've got Geller fields, they'll create a bubble around your ship that keeps those nightmares out and helps keep everyone inside stay safe and connected to reality. Every ship needs to turn on its Geller field before making a jump into the warp. If the ship fails, it can lead to some really bad stuff, like getting attacked by demons or getting lost within the chaos. It's best to tread carefully if you ever find yourself near the warp, going for a Sunday stroll. It might seem like the only things living in the warp are demons and crazy creatures, but believe it or not, there are these entire planets and all sorts of life forms that call this nightmarish place home, whether they want to or not. These poor worlds, they've either been sucked into the warp through rifts or dragged in by twisted plans of the chaos gods and their wild followers. The people that are living on these chaos worlds, they're stuck in their own personal hell, suffering through some pretty awful experiences. It's a really grim existence, to say the least. Is there a silver lining? I don't know. Different races within the Warhammer universe, they'll have their own ways of jumping through space, but most of them actually rely on the warp for long distance travel. To make this happen, they need a few key things: a Psycho Navigator, a special engine, and like I mentioned earlier, a solid Geller field. So while the warp, it's super dangerous, it does actually help people get across the galaxy a lot faster, just as long as they're well prepared. When a Geller field fails though, it can lead to some really scary stuff. If you're on a ship when that happens, the raw energy from the warp, it can actually cause everyone on board to start mutating in really strange ways. Time and space, they get all messed up and literally nothing makes sense anymore. And even if a ship can be rescued after a failure, the people on it, they're often quarantined to get rid of any chaos influence. Plus, time works totally differently in the warp. So a ship that disappears for just 5 minutes could come back thousands of years later, or it might not come back at all. Sometimes it could even end up in a totally different time period. Demonic incursions or attacks by demons, they don't happen all the time, especially if you're not living on a world that's really close to a chaotic area like Maelstrom, but they can still pop up from time to time. These incursions, they usually occur in places where the barrier between our reality and the chaotic warp is thin, making it easier for demons to break through. Sometimes they can happen like completely at random, especially if something supernatural weakens that barrier, like a strange ritual or event. Sometimes demons can take over people and turn them into living gateways to the warp. Humanity tries really hard to keep these breaches under control, but they can't stop them. So when a breach happens, a massive wave of monsters and strange creatures from the warp can flood through and try to consume everything in sight. Now, while all this chaos is happening, the area around the rift gets really messed up and tainted, putting the world or ship at risk of being pulled into the warp forever. Now then, let's discuss Chaos Gods. Even though the warp seems like a chaotic mess, it's not just floating around aimlessly. It's actually ruled by some super powerful gods. Now, these mysterious beings, they came to life from all the emotions and the turmoil that have just been swirling around the universe for ages. Each of these gods embodies a different aspect of the galaxy. So while it might look like total chaos, there's actually a wild game going on behind the scenes. No single god of chaos ever really stays on top for long. The power of each one, it shifts up and down, kind of like the mood swings for the universe itself. For instance, there might be a time when Nurgle's gross, rotting gardens start spreading into territory that used to belong to Khorne. But then you've also got, out of nowhere, Tzeentch, the god of change, might swoop in and then cover those gardens with strange crystals and set them on fire with his chaotic magic. It's like a never-ending battle between these gods, always in a state of chaos. However, every once in a while, they'll set aside their differences and they team up for a common goal. It's really good of them, actually. A big example of this was during the Horus Heresy. When the combined forces of chaos, they tried to take down the Emperor of Mankind and his forces on Terra. So it's kind of like a wild, unpredictable playground, if you could give it a comparison. There's also a bit of discussion about a god called Malice, but the details about this deity, they're pretty unclear, and most people, they don't really consider it part of the main lore. It's probably not worth going too deep into it, so we'll just give it a quick mention if it's something you wanted to research on your own. But to give you a better understanding, here's a brief overview of each of the main gods and what they represent. Obviously, I can go into much more detail in individual videos if that interests you. As frightening and as wicked as chaos can be, there are still those who just fully embrace it. Some people, and even entire worlds, devote themselves to dark gods. For those who pull off some truly horrific acts, especially on a huge scale, there are definitely rewards waiting for them, which kind of gives them that incentive. But spoiler alert, these rewards, they aren't always great. So for example, they might find their power boosted tenfold or even get a promotion to demonhood, but on the flip side, they could end up like mutating uncontrollably and turning into like a mindless chaos swarm, this twisted, mutated beast that just goes around smashing everything in sight. Each gift, it's unique, but one thing all these worshippers have in common is that they end up with a permanent mark on their bodies. Worshippers of chaos are called heretics, and they come in all sorts of forms, usually, you know, women that talk about Warhammer online. No, I'm joking. One of the most famous groups among them is the Fallen Chaos Space Marines. Now, these were once noble and honourable warriors, but they've completely given themselves over to a dark god and have been twisted into these terrifying new versions of themselves. There are also countless human cults on different planets that worship chaos, and let's not forget those with psychic abilities are particularly vulnerable to chaos because they have a direct connection to the immaterium. Different factions of the Imperium are fighting back against the forces of chaos, with the Inquisition and the Grey Knights, for example, being the most notable. Although their success, it can be hit or miss, one of their most effective methods for getting rid of chaos is through planet-wide purges called exterminators. It's a heavy-handed approach, but it's one of their best options for cleansing the taint of chaos. If you happen to live on a planet that's considered beyond saving from the forces of chaos, you need to get yourself ready for a very wild ride. So first, you'll sort of experience this heart-pounding thrill of terror. Then it's lights out, as some seriously apocalyptic weapons will just rain down on your home. And we're talking everything from DNA melting bombs and these nasty viruses to massive bombardments that scorch the atmosphere, external radiation, even planet bursting torpedoes. Once the order is given, there's no escaping it. Your world is toast. You're gone. So in a nutshell, chaos in Warhammer 40k, it's a wild and twisted ride that it shapes the galaxy in so many ways that we can barely imagine it, really. From the terrifying gods that embody the darkest aspects of existence to the countless followers who embrace their madness, chaos brings both horror and intrigue to the universe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the chaotic side of Warhammer 40k, please be sure to give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, and please subscribe for more epic lore breakdowns. If you've got any questions or thoughts about chaos, please drop them in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you for watching, and remember, here we go. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war and a sprinkle of chaos. See you in the next video.